I grew up in Scarborough, actually. Getting anywhere was impossible. You needed 3 hours, like it would be 3 hours added to my day every day. Hour and a half to get to work, hour and a half to get back. It's abysmal. Anyway, next on the docket we have Kevin Konnyu, I believe it's Konnyu, from OccupyTTC.
I grew up in Mississauga. It's the same thing. I used to walk to school because the bus was so long. So in terms of what are the principal challenges, I think they've been identified, and I'll just probably relist some of the ones that I think are really important. I think one of the main ones that keeps coming up is, for me anyways, and some other people mention it, is narrative versus fact. You know, we have a system and a government now in all levels, you know, that works exclusively on narrative. And as some people were talking about in speaking to, you know, residents and riders, you know, not even aware of, you know, some of the facts and some of the options on the table and so on. And for me, like that's just, it's paramount because it factors into what I think some of the solutions are, you know, which I think coming from the Occupy perspective and the perspective of those affected by decisions ought to be the ones making the decisions, you know. So basically, I think, you know, the Occupy perspective is that greater democracy and greater community involvement and agency is what's important. However, if you know, you do straw polls isn't democracy. You know, just asking randomly, as the media have been doing in the last week, you know, would you prefer subways to, you know, streetcars? It's not really a, you know, valid question. You know, it's like, you might as well ask, would you prefer, you know, hover cars to wheeled vehicles? You know, like it's, you know, or, and then there's also the perspective of validating, you know, like in the Occupy movement, you know, there's this, the idea is that every individual, you know, has valid information, a lived experience, a perspective that is worthwhile, and that's their worthwhile contribution. The naive, simplistic, you know, interpretation of that is that, you know, I have a valid point of perspective on everything. So if you're designing a rocket ship, you know, ask me what kind of fuel you should use in it, you know, and that sort of thing. And that's not quite what democracy is, right? And so they're tricking us when they run out onto the street and they start asking, you know, would you prefer this or that? You know, when you don't have the information, and we see that, you know, across the board now. We see it with things like the crime bill, things like, you know, the killing of all, you know, information gathering institutions that we have, like, you know, Statistics Canada or CIRIS for immigration research, you know. And so these are the needs of people, you know, that they're wiping out, you know, and then replacing with narrative. And there have been some good columns on that, you know, like if you look at Ford's mantra, and it doesn't matter how many times the mantra comes up against the stark reality of fact, you know, is that it still works. It's still what, when I walk around talking to people, a lot of people are like, you know, they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, you caught him there, but I still like him. I still like what he's, you know, stands for and where he's coming from. And the thing that, you know, kind of worries me is that I don't have a good answer for how to get over that. You know, I don't think the answer is, you know, to be equally obfuscating and, you know, equally simplistic with narrative, you know, but so some of the things that I think, again, come from Occupy. So if you've seen Occupy, you'll see that, you know, it's often meetings or general assemblies that are run by a facilitator, you know, rotating group of facilitators. And I've really become very respectful of that role of facilitator, because it's really interesting. It's not, and we've gone through in Occupy a lot of problems with interpretations of what it is. But, you know, like with going back to those questions, you know, asking people the questions, would you prefer, you know, light rail to subways? Well, that's, you know, as I'm sure everybody here knows, by just asking certain questions, you're framing, you know, and you're excluding, you know, things. So a good facilitator would step back from, you know, the assertions and the, you know, the people who are spitballing, you know, their brilliant ideas from positions of general ignorance. You know, let's be honest with ourselves as well. It's like, you know, if, you know, you're running a family and the car breaks down, you know, and you run home and you do a straw poll with everybody, well, what's wrong with the car and how should we fix it? You know, like, not necessarily going to get a running car, you know, where the question that might be asked is, you know, what do we need the car for? Where are we going with the car? Who needs the car on what days, you know? So that's the role of the facilitator, to identifying the underlying needs and concerns and bring people together on those. And that's what we're not doing enough of. So when we run around asking false questions, we're dividing people, you know? And it's this, and we see this all the time. Like last year, you know, the media had a field day, and I think the politicians must have loved it, you know, when, you know, citizens and TTC workers were attacking, you know, and the politicians and everybody was stoking it, you know, and so people are snapping photos of sleeping TTC agents, and TTC agents who get spit on and pushed around by people all day are, you know, and I've witnessed it, are snapping back at you know, the riders. You know, and people are working against each other. And, you know, again, that plays into the hands where what are the underlying needs and concerns of these, you know, groups of people. And I found that when, you know, and I think, I'm sure some of the people who were speaking already, when they talk to people, find that when you dig and you ask that question, you know, like, so when you ask the person waiting for the bus, you know, for a really long time, what's your main concern here? And it's not going to be like, I need a subway. It's going to be, I need to get to work, you know, and I need to be able to get back home. I need to get to my kids. I need to do these, you know, different things. And so that's where, you know, I think we need to come from on this and really start getting away from the pre-imposed narrative and the pre-imposed, you know, false dichotomies and false choices that we're given, and work in these ways of community, you know, one-on-one. Like when I started OccupyTTC, Camilla was asking me, oh, what has OccupyTTC done? And I have to admit, everybody that's been up here now, you're much more of an organization than OccupyTTC was, you know, whereas OccupyTTC was more or less me sitting in a cafe on my way to another Occupy event, and I read the paper and it said, you know, fare hike, service decrease. And I was like, what? You know, and I had seen this documentary years ago on the LA Transit Riders Union, and how they, you know, went on the buses and they spoke directly with the people, and, you know, and how, you know, just like the recent report in the Toronto Star about the working poor in Toronto growing, you know, that all the working poor are all the lines that are having the decreased, you know, the cuts to services, and already have the worst services, you know, in the city, you know. At the same time, they're because of, you know, defunding and austerity, you know, the workers are affected, you know. So what they did is they got on the buses and talked to, you know, the workers as well as, you know, the riders, found out what their underlying needs and concerns were, and organized these awesome campaigns around it. The most inspiring of which, and the one I'd really like to see Toronto get to, because I really can't believe, I mean, Canadians like to think of ourselves as way more liberal than the States, but, you know, in the States, in LA, they managed to actually convince people to participate, the drivers and the riders, in a fare strike, you know? So, you know, go ahead, raise the fares, we're not gonna pay it, you know? And we organize with the union, and we do public, this is what we were talking about in some of the meetings. You know, I think we need to break down all those divisions, you know, and show that underlying all these needs, Scarborough residents have the same, you know, needs as, you know, downtowners, Etobicoke, and the drivers. And if we can work together, you know, a lot of people were talking about let's make the politicians do what they are hired to do. And, you know, with all due respect to anybody representing political parties in the room, and, you know, the systems right now are failing people all over the world. This austerity measure, you know, program isn't just in Toronto. This is a narrative that's being imposed all over the world that, you know, the financial collapse was our fault. You know, that somehow we were riding the gravy train all this time of, you know, super, public transit that we couldn't afford, and super pensions and super public, you know, wages. So I just got the 2-minute sign. So that's where we come from. I think a lot of us know what we want, but we're being, you know, misdirected. And in my experience, when I got on, I just sat down with a few people on my way in, saying, "Hey, have you heard of, you know, my name's this, and have you heard of Occupy?" And I'm gonna, you know, start up a conversation doing this mic check thing. If you hear me call mic check, can you just repeat with me? You know, I want to talk about, you know, how unfair it is that, you know, they're increasing our, you know, fees and decreasing our service. And I got over a quarter of the car participating, and in fact, you know, when a hater from the back started just yelling out, you know, some elderly gentleman used the mic check, you know, to call back and say, "Hey, you know, can you let him finish? I think he's just trying to give us tools so that we can organize ourselves." And I did that once, you know, and then there was these other ones that happened, you know, and people thought that I had involved and I had organized it and stuff like that. I didn't. Somebody had recorded me on those first 2 that I did on their cell phone cameras and posted them online. And then within weeks, others were being organized that were 2-3 times larger, you know, and I was getting all this feedback from people going, "Oh, it's amazing, and we've done this, and we changed this," and, you know, and they just wrote, one day they wrote for hours, just up and down, and people were having conversations. Other people, other than the people who were instigating it, were actually doing it. So I don't think there's one way, but I think that's one contribution. I think, you know, the meme of the Occupy movement, the 99 versus the 1, the us versus the them, it's not our fault kind of thing, you know, and like everybody else was saying, and is really doing that talking, and especially with the suburban, you know, communities. That's all I want to say.